So everyone, I'd love to welcome you to Growing Your Confidence and Humility with the due to give birth any second now, Lindsay Burr, and the not due to give birth any second now, Liz Monroe-Cook. That is like the one difference. They're both brunettes. You can barely tell them apart. This is going to be, as expected, a fascinating session. And we are super looking forward to all of the learning and the information. So without any other lead in, I'm going to turn it over to the lovely ladies.
Thank you so much. We are so excited to be here. We're excited to dive into our session around confidence and humility, a dynamic tension. I'm Lindsay. I'm based in DC and honored to be paired with Liz. Like, we have just so enjoyed putting this together. And Liz, do you want to say hey?
I'm just so glad that we had this opportunity, and I'm based in the Chicago area, Oak Park specifically. So, and actually Lindsay and I do love working together and have had other opportunities. So, but glad to share this with everyone here.
Yes. So we're going to dive right in with the goals of the session and some of the way that we've set it up. So we're going to do a basic intro with some definitions, the polarity of confidence and humility. And the way polarities are set up is that you need both for the health of the system. And we're going to be talking about the kind of the health of the internal system, how we show up with confidence and humility. We're going to clarify. So we're going to lead you through clarifying for yourself your preferences and learning opportunities. So oftentimes within a polarity, when we have a strong preference, that gives us a way to realize and see how we can stretch ourselves to integrate the other pole. We'll talk more about that as we move through this session. And then we'll talk about the external factors. So biases, things that are in our societies that can be barriers to us integrating these polarities the way that we personally would want to, and kind of acknowledging that we sit in a social setting that changes how we view them. And then now with that information, getting to decide what we each like to do with that. And the deciding will come in the form of ideating, developing, and implementing a plan to get the best of both. And we'll use a polarity map as the tool for that. The hashtag fake goals, things that we will not be doing today, is that by the end of the session, you will not be a guru of creativity after this one CPSI session. We are excited to add this theory as part of how you might view CPS or illuminate further things for yourself. And we won't be diving into creativity or to polarities in an in-depth way. Liz and I have both spent 2 years going through polarity mastery or more. And so this is definitely a Cliff's Notes, a hint of the theory. Another fake goal is to be your perfect self, that we will erase all anxiety, you'll have total confidence, and then at the same time be the Dalai Lama of perfect humility. That is not the case, and we're excited to give you some tools and moments to reflect on that. What might you want to integrate? Adding that question. So those are our goals and fake goals. And we'd like you to take a moment to reflect. We're inviting you to do this in your notebooks, to just note, or into the chat, excuse me, what drew you to this session from the description? Obviously knowing that Liz and I were leading it aside. So if you could pop that into the chat. Humility, opportunity to explore this polarity, wanted to know more about this in today's environment. Mm-hmm. Aligning strengths, mm-hmm. Wondering about scaffolding. Okay. Interesting polarity. Great.
Okay.
Thank you. That's helpful for us to benchmark. And So you can keep adding those. We're excited to have them. Curious about polarities and the balance.
Mm-hmm.
Awesome. Great. I'm going to keep going, but please do keep adding them to the chat if you've been reflecting on them.
Right. And we'll remind you to save the chat at the end so that you can go back and see what others have said if you don't have time right now.
Absolutely. So which of the two elements, this is a little bit of a pop quiz for yourself. Which of the two elements between confidence and humility pulls you most strongly? And I want you to be honest with yourself and just jot that down in your notebook. And if you really, really see the value of both, which is one of the great successes of this community, the ability to see multiple sides, I'd still like you to push yourself to say, when it comes to it, is there one you prefer? Like we're usually left-handed or right-handed, even if you do some things with both. Try to be honest and note to yourself which one is easiest for you to step into. And then give us a thumbs up, either with the reactions or yourself when you've got it noted. Okay. Great. And so please use the rename function for your Zoom profile, knowing that we all value both, or we can value both, and like you to rename yourself with a C or an H at the beginning. You mouse over yourself, the three little dots that are up here, and then click rename, and you can just add a little C or H. See some C's popping up, some H's. That's great. And again, knowing that we all value both, and we're not gonna hold you to that. As you do that, if you have any technical difficulties, you can ping Beth or Faith as well, so that way they can help you through that. So to tie it all back, why are we talking about this for creativity? We really were thoughtful about why we wanted to bring this one forward. And in the foundations of creative problem solving, both and thinking is really promoted, because so much of, especially American culture, but a lot of global culture focuses on either or thinking. We're really good at deciding between things, or making things black and white, moving things forward. And so we know that both and thinking is promoted, and we really wanted to tie in confidence and humility, because when it comes to polarities, along with diverge and converge, which happens, that we talk about all the time, confidence and humility is a really great one to help tie into confident enough to say your idea, no matter how wild and out there and novel it may be. Humility to look at what is generated, to see what else is out there, how else are people thinking about it, how else might we put it together, and making space for each other. So it's that play between the confidence to put it together, the humility to keep space, and that dynamic tension. If you pick just one, you're not going to really build creativity. And we're really excited that I think it's by the end of this year, Liz has actually written a chapter in a book that will be published that specifically focuses on tying creative problem solving and the creativity community to polarities. And in that same book, I have a chapter about how do we as individuals step into embodying these dynamics of leadership. So I say that to point out how passionate we are about these topics and tying them to making them really applicable and tangible into the lives that you all are leading. So we're so tickled to have you. So, okay. And now,
before you go on, what's the book title so we can keep our eyes out for it?
It is And Volume 2 I think it's by Johnson et al. I think that's how they're doing it, because it's multiple authors. So and volume 1 came out this year about polarities, and volume 2 is application. And we'll be sending that to Missy to include in the bibliography.
Yeah.
So
great.
Thanks. I always forget that part. So,
Yep.
Okay, here we go.
So as we pointed out, as Lindsay's already pointed out, these are really sometimes treated as if they're opposites or a paradox. And that's when we get ourselves into either or thinking. Either I'm going to be confident or I'm going to be humble is not as workable as viewing them as in reality a partnership. So success would be decided by having both, not making that false either or choice. Next slide. So one of the things that we've come to understand is how each state has desirable outcomes to seek. This is true of virtually all polarities, by the way. When you take the two states together, it allows you to achieve high-level goals, which when we're doing things later, we'll talk about a high-level goal, such as being effective creatively might be our high-level goal when we're talking about bringing together confidence and humility. Next. Each state can also have undesirable outcomes if they are overdone and neglect the other one. So if we overdo confidence and neglect humility, or if we overdo humility and neglect confidence, we're going to end up with some negatives, some downsides, we call them. And together, those negatives can lead to failure. This poor dog doesn't have the humility to understand where he should be jumping, and also has misplaced confidence about jumping without knowing where to jump. So this is when, if you end up in the downsides, you don't get your high-level goal. Next. So the first thing that we're going to ask you to do is to have a breakout right now. And what we'd like you to do is to have a very brief period where you introduce yourselves to one another. You're going to be in a breakout of 4 people, we hope, 3 to 4 people. If you do not wish to be in a breakout, you need to let Beth or the wing know that. Correct, Beth? How do they do that?
They can send me a message.
Send you a message in chat. Okay. So after briefly introducing yourselves, we'd like you to note which pole in each individual in your group has identified as C or H, as their preferred pole, even if it's not a hugely strong preference. And if you would take a moment or two to talk about what makes that pole, confidence or humility, appealing to you. And what is it that you don't like about the other pole? So we're going to talk about the benefits of your preferred pole and possible downsides of your non-preferred pole in this. So we're going to give you 10 minutes for this breakout. And when you come back, we'll give you another quick set of introductions. And then we're going to, go ahead.
I did want to say, per what I mentioned before, that this community is really good about spinning things to the positive, and that it can be hard to hear that something you value is not something someone else values, that this really is an okay place to say, I really like confidence, and this is really why. And I worry about humility because this is really why. So for me, I love confidence because it really makes me feel strong and clear and with authority, doing the things that I love. And I worry about humility because if it's overdone, which is the downside, if it's overdone, it's a boring doormat. And that's something I worry about. And so, Liz, I didn't know if you would want to give an example.
Sure. For me, I love humility because it means that I am on a fresh daily learning curve. And I feel thrilled by the learning that I can do by not assuming that I know everything. And the thing that I worry about with confidence is when that becomes overweening confidence, when it becomes too much so what people might view as arrogance because of what you're sharing or doing. And that is a part of me that I don't want to go into. So that's an example of how the conversation might go. And Lindsay and I are wonderful example of that, because she and I do have these opposite preferences, quote unquote opposite. And look at how well our partnership has gone, Lindsay. So, it's a great example of having those two together.
Exactly. Exactly.
All right.
So I just wanted to model that a little bit so we don't have to argue each other out of our points or affirm overly. So
yeah, that's great. Thank you. Thank you. Wonderful insert. All right. So ready for breakouts, folks?
I'm all ready. Are you ready?
Yep. Okay. Off we go. Welcome back. Welcome back. Are we all back now? Will someone give me a high sign when that's okay?
Yep, everybody's here.
Okay, great. Welcome back, everyone. So that was your primer for what we're going to be talking about in the next set of slides, and then in your next breakout as well. So there were a couple of questions that we wanted to acknowledge now. That one was about, where does false humility fit? And we are going to try and talk about that, because there's a piece of it that could belong in the downside of confidence and a piece of it that could belong in the downside of humility. So let us come back to that one. But there was a question also that, Laura, I think you asked about preferences. And do you do something different when you're at work, for example? And the answer is yes. That when you're at work, for example, your job may call on you to show assets from both confidence and humility. And we also would agree that it's something that's true in our personal lives as well, that when you're expanding into relationships, you want to be able to be assertive enough to share something with somebody who's important to you, and humble enough to listen to what they have to say as well. So the answer is yes in both circumstances. If you have a preference and a very strong preference, then it's very useful to use polarity thinking to help you know what it is that you might want to add to your attitudes, to your mindset, to your skill set. So, and with that, let me talk a little bit about how we sometimes, with polarity thinking, which is the work of Barry Johnson, do something that we call mapping. And so I'm going to show you in this slide how we would look at, in one place, the upsides and downsides of confidence and humility. Go, Lindsay. So we have our two poll names. And as we look at confidence, and these may be some things that you've already said. So these are our suggestions for things that are positives, but you may have, and we hope you will add more to this list. But on the positive side of confidence is the ability to have an impact, to make a declaration. You're demonstrating respect for yourself, and you're showing that you trust yourself. You are also very often leading the way for yourself and for others when you're in the upside of confidence. Next. Now, on the other side, on the humility negative side, the people who favor, for example, confidence are probably not going to like very much being a pushover. This is a version of oppressing yourself rather than respecting yourself. And it's very often demonstrated or manifested as being fearful or hanging back or even retreating from a circumstance. Next. On the other side, again, on confidence, if you're overdoing confidence and neglecting humility, one of the things that can start to happen is that you are essentially being arrogant. You're the only one on the planet as far as you're concerned, and other people's opinions take second place and maybe even third or fifth place. So sometimes we'll use the word hubris to talk about this, as in who gives you the right kind of thing to declare the world for everybody else. And some of the worst forms, you can even see bullying going on with the neglect of humility and the overdoing of confidence, or being dominating of others. And now let's take a look at the positives of humility. So the upsides of a focus on humility is learning and curiosity and respecting others and trusting others and working collaboratively. So if you look at this chart, you can see that there really are both diagonal relationships and across the way relationships. So impact and declaration on the confidence side, learning and curiosity on the humility side, respecting yourself and trusting yourself, respecting others and trusting others, leading the way and working collaboratively. those are the ideals. This is when you're making a full partnership of it, is you would be doing all of these behaviors and avoiding the negatives, spending as little time as possible in the negatives. Next slide. Oh, by the way, yes, can we go back to a second? I just want to point out that this is the work of Barry Johnson, and we will put his book title, which is "And," in the chat, or eventually we are going to send this off to Missy, who is doing a great job of assembling all the titles that have been mentioned in the sessions. So this is what's called a polarity thinking map. And now you're going to have a chance to do this yourselves. Lindsay.
Yeah. Thanks. And I wanted to point out, oftentimes there's an infinity loop that'll run through these. We'll look at that a little bit more later. And I'm only pointing that out right now because that's how our next exercise is set up, where we'll walk through in more detail the upside of confidence. When confidence is overdone and humility is neglected, you get the downside, and then it'll go up to the upside of humility and those positives. And then if humility is overdone and confidence is neglected. So just wanted to tell you that, so the order of questions in our next exercise is not a surprise.
Right.
So we are going to go to do a breakout, and the breakout will also include going to Poll Everywhere, which I'm really excited to use to create a word cloud. And I'm going to show you what that'll look like in just a second. So I'm going to describe how this will work. You'll be back with your group of 4. We're going to map this polarity using a word cloud. The first question will come up, which is, what are the best qualities, outcomes, and feelings of confidence? And then you'll have a minute and a half. Oh, we want one person in your group to add words on the behalf of everyone. So you'll have one note taker. So if you get into the room and only one person can get into the word cloud, that's fine. If everybody can get in, please let one person be the note taker. A minute and a half to add as many words as possible. And then the next question will come up, and the wing or myself will broadcast the new question is coming. So if you get that broadcast and it doesn't update in your window, just hit refresh, because it'll come up. And so if you have a longer concept, with word clouds, the words get bigger as you add to them. So if you say clarity as an upside of confidence, that's fine. That'll go as that word. But if you're saying, like, I have a strong point of view and you want those to stay connected, you can either put a dash or an underscore between the words. So that's for the note takers out there. And those directions just went into the chat as well. So you will work quickly. You don't have to agree with everybody. You do have to kind of capture those words. That's how it'll look. I'm going to show you when you click the link what it'll look like, so that way you know as well. So when you click the link that I'll put in, this is what will come up, and you can dismiss or agree to the cookies, and then just click skip. You don't have to put your name and information in. And then it'll look like this. What are your best qualities, outcomes? Okay, so I just wanted to give you the heads up about that. And I'm going to go ahead and copy the link and put it into the chat. Any questions about that before we open the chat rooms back up? It'll make a lot of sense when you get in there. You'll have a minute and a half to answer the question, and then we'll come back and look at it. And as always, we'll be here in the main room. So if you need something, just holler, because we can come join you.
Welcome back, everybody.
We're all back.
All right. So that was, we could watch the build from our side. And so we are going to be able to share that with you at some point. But just in general, I'm wondering if you would comment on what that experience was like in that breakout, to be mapping something like that, to hear what others were saying and think about that yourselves. And you can unmute yourself. We can take a few comments right now, or you can put something into chat. Either way. So again, the question is, what was that like?
We have some people saying super cool.
Mhm.
Loved the poll everywhere.
Mhm.
Helpful.
Helpful to, yeah.
Put names and labels on the qualities.
Mhm.
I'd be interested to know if some of our words in the excess sides of each side could
Mhm.
be interchangeable.
From what we could observe, I'm sure that they are, Olwen.
Oh.
And I think when we're able to display all 4 quadrants for you, you'll see that. And so it might be the same idea expressed differently as what you're getting at, right? Yeah. So
Yeah.
some things did pop into the center because of frequency, but there were a lot of ideas that were being expressed. And Renee, you have your hand up.
Yeah, one of the things that our group would have liked is something that came up in a later part of the questions prompted us for something we were thinking we'd like to add to the other
Of
side
course.
of what
Yes.
happened. And yet we
Yes,
were
yes.
able to do that because we
Yeah.
couldn't go back at that point. So
Yeah. What a good point, Renee. And actually, when you are doing mapping on your own or with a group, you have that capacity to go, oh, that sparks me to think that the opposite of that would be the upside of this thing in confidence or the upside of this thing in humility. Yeah, it's a really good point about polarity thinking in general, that sometimes when I'm talking about my preferred pole, I have a harder time filling out the negatives about my preference, right? But I can tell you all about yours. So it's really nice to be able to use other people's entries to kind of help me flesh out the things that are hard for me to answer, like, really, you think there's a downside to humility? Really? And you're going to tell me that there's an upside to confidence, but I'm so worried about being arrogant, so that's when that mapping process in a group becomes very rich for everybody. So yeah, good point. Our technology today didn't allow for that. Other things.
And I've got the word cloud ready, Liz, if you want me to share that, if that's helpful.
What I think is I'd like people to be able to see it, just to see it. And we're going to come back to this later. So yeah, Lindsay, if you can show us what it's like
It's a little
to use
messy,
a word cloud.
but
A little messy.
here's how we've
Yeah, it's a nice one to photograph for yourself right now, taking a screenshot of that. So on Macs, that's Shift Command 3, if you want to do that. And we are going to come back and look at this later, but any quick observations that people can make about what this experience drew from you? I'm sorry, I can't see all the hands. I need to look for any hands that are up or.
I don't see any. I've done a look through.
One thing that I would like to observe is that it seemed that we kind of shifted between qualities that people who have confidence or humility have versus behaviors.
Sure.
Activities. So there were two different. So sometimes we would say, oh, you have this quality, and it leads to this behavior. So I think in all of those cases, it was we saw that.
Right. And, actually, when we're doing the divergent part of mapping, anything is legit to go in there. There are times when we would ask people to converge just around behavior. For example, there are ways of even getting at that through survey questions and all that sort of thing. But it's an interesting and powerful observation, Peg. Yeah. That you can find yourself shifting from attitude to behavior to feeling states even. So
the one thing I'd add too is when I've been working in a system where the whole system has a preference for one of the two poles, not necessarily with confidence and humility, but that even adding what would you call someone who is displaying this poorly helps them break through some of their ability to see the upside of the non-preference. So thinking about diplomatic and direct, I worked with a company that does international political exchanges around diplomacy. And so no is almost a bad word. And so like to say, what would you get called if you were overdoing direct helped them process the things that they were worried about. And so that can, to add on to what you were saying, Peg, like it's not like it's those qualities that even to the point of what name calling would pull out.
Mhm, mhm. And one of the things that we know to be a truth, if you will, or a common experience about polarities is that the stronger my preference for a pole, the more I will try to avoid, the stronger my dislike for the downside of the other pole.
Mm.
So I'll even tolerate my own downside, right, in order to avoid that other.
Mhm.
If my preferences are not that strong, then I won't have as much difficulty with that. But just noting for yourself, like something like structure and flexibility, if you have a very strong preference for flexibility, you're going to even go with the chaos that that can create in order to avoid rigidity. You know, does that make sense to folks?
It does.
Yeah. Okay. So same thing could be here too. Thanks, Lindsay. That was great. All right. So we wanted to, we wanted you to think about these questions. So what you notice, what it reminds you of, what does it mean, and what are decision or action implications. I think what we'll do is we will make sure that you get a copy of this slide. By the way, we forgot to mention that, Lindsay, that we are going to provide you with a certain subset of the slides at the end of the presentation. We'll send a PDF, and these questions will be yours to go back to after that. But because I want you to be able to hear what Lindsay is going to talk about with, you know, our movement to the next slide is really to remind you that what we've been talking about with polarities. Next slide, Lindsay.
Sorry. Oh, thanks.
All right. So that one of the things that happens when we bring these two things together is that you get a very powerful combination. And so our invention for this experience of bringing together humility and confidence is what we would call confident doubt. And we wanted to share this particular quote with you. Doubt used to be the province of the wise and has now been relegated as the province of the weak. Doubt is a sign of sophistication and strength, and contemporary TV shows like Crossfire and phenomena like the presidential debates do not seem to allow for doubt. And I think that people would be relieved to hear leaders saying something like, that is something that I really ponder about and I am struggling with. This was a statement made by the playwright of Doubt, a Parable, which was also a movie, as some of you might remember. And so to me, it does speak to that power of bringing together two things that can seem like opposites. So next.
All right.
So onward to part two, which is going to be Lindsay. We have been talking about, there's the infinity loop that we were talking about. Another polarity is that in our session so far, what we've been doing with polarities is focusing on the inner world. And now with Lindsay's great help, we are going to focus on the outer world. The things that we experience in the environment or from people around us that may affect our own feelings about confidence and humility.
Yes. So, yes, in the context of being creative and helping others with creativity, what are some of the things that affect either your confidence or humility from the environment or people around you? And actually, it's we'd love you to post that into the chat. Just thinking about that moment when you're around people and you feel their confidence or humility, specifically thinking about creativity. How does it affect psychological safety? Yes. Great. How much fun we're going to have. Absolutely. It's a lot. Experience attending CPSI for so many years and bringing it back to my corporate and personal life makes me feel confident about using in my post-corporate years. Yes. The amazing articulateness of my fellow CPSI goers. You have a lot of confidence to tell people you don't know something. Yes.
Mm-hmm.
And how threatening or non-threatening a space feels. Absolutely. In many all or mostly male environments, and so I had to display confidence whether I felt it or not. Mm-hmm. And Chris, thank you. It is like a plant for where we are headed. So I know more things will come into the chat, and I'm going to keep going because that is part of the nuance that we're going to look at with thinking about the external world. So it's navigating that external world and what to do about unconscious bias as it affects confidence and humility. So I've got this list up here. They're really, for me, we'll include them in the handout, but for now I'm going to take it down so that I can see faces, if that's okay with you guys, and you can see my face. So I'm going to run through a few examples of unconscious bias. It's a term that a lot of people have heard, and we oftentimes have examples, and it really, I love examples that help illuminate it further. So who has heard of the Heidi Howard experiment? Yes, no. Okay, great. I love this. So Heidi Howard, it was in the Columbia School of Business, where they had a group of business students and handed out the resumes to say, to tables of students to say, we want you to read through this resume and say what your impressions are, whether you would hire this person, and whether you would want them on your team. And the only thing they changed was the name Heidi or Howard. Now for Howard, people said he's got a lot of leadership experience, he's really driven, and he's clearly a team player, and I would definitely want him on my team. That's what they said about Howard. About Heidi, they said she's clearly individualistic. She has very little leadership experience. She's self-centered. She's probably self-centered, and I would not want her on my team. And that last one really hits me the hardest. One, because I love being included in everything. But two, when you think about the implications for being hired, and as women navigate confidence and humility, if you say it as strongly confident, you get reassigned to the downside. And oftentimes, if we say it as strongly humble, we get reassigned to the downside. Now, this is true. A lot of these examples about unconscious bias are going to be true for any group that's not the, I've been calling it the classic expectation of leadership, which, if I may, in the US, is white, male, over 55, straight, Christian, fully able-bodied. And I feel like I've forgotten one that I'll throw in a minute. So as soon as you're one or more off of that, you are less likely to be seen as what you're going for, that upside. So when we look at Heidi and Howard is seen as a leader that who's collaborative and you want to have on your team, and Heidi is seen as individualistic and you wouldn't want her on your team. So that highlights the real dynamic that we are navigating. And then I love, someone just said, that's why top level orchestra auditions were changed. How dare you, Renee? Because that is my next example. In symphonies, in philharmonics, there were it was all men. And when they were asked, why aren't there more women? It was, there are not any qualified women. That term is what gets thrown out. There aren't any qualified ones. If we wanted to include women, we'd have to lower our standards. So the Philadelphia Philharmonic was the one that I heard of first doing this. They put up a screen so that people could come out and audition behind the screen. And within the first round, it went from 5% women getting through to 50% women getting through. And like, that is not insignificant. And they've even added now carpet, so you can't hear their feet, like the sound of the shoes. Renee, is there anything you would add since you stole my thunder?
Clearly we read the same book.
Yes.
What struck me was that the women weren't competent because they didn't have enough force to like even have the air power for certain instruments like a horn. So that perception just so getting in the way of what someone was capable of doing.
Exactly. And that perception kind of even, it can be made conscious by saying women don't have enough force. So therefore you see a woman and you automatically assume, therefore they're this. And so that's another example of unconscious bias. And race played into those auditions as well.
Yeah.
For race and unconscious bias, there are a ton of examples. One of my close friends and colleagues, Lisa Kopinski, who does work on inclusion nudges, and that's her research, and she's written a couple of books with her and Tina Nielsen as her literary partner. She herself, who does work in unconscious bias, was at a speech. She was about to go on stage. She didn't know the woman who was going to introduce her by sight, but she knew her name. And Lisa turned to the woman next to her who had on a white shirt and black pants. And she said, "I'm so sorry. Could you get me some water?" And that woman was Hispanic. And she said, or Latina. And she said, "No, because I'm the one introducing you." And Lisa was there to talk about unconscious bias and had just assumed that the woman was part of the wait staff. So like the pieces about race come up all the time. We've been talking about that in the US and globally for the last year and a half. So I hope that there are lots of examples about race that are fresh for you, especially thinking about the African American community in the US. LGBTQIA, ton of examples as well. So anytime, and Muslim, like anytime you add a layer of those top things that I wrote about when we're thinking about who the standard is for what we're comparing it to, there's going to be room for unconscious bias. And then microaggressions are just exhausting. And BIPOC, thanks, Marilyn. Yeah, so Indigenous peoples. And as soon as you add in microaggressions, we start to realize that our exhaustion is fully warranted. I feel like men often ask women, "Why are you so tired?" It's like, well, let's talk about how I get told to smile every time I'm walking through the airport. And let's talk about how like I'm expected to show up and expected to look, and all of these different layers that, again, men face as well. So men are in this dynamic as well. And over the last year, I've heard more things about men feeling imposter syndrome as well. And when you look at the dynamics of who bears the weight of it, it's people who are outside the classic power dynamic. This is making sense to everybody. I say all this not to exhaust us, but to affirm that when we're looking at specifically the dynamic of confidence and humility, there's the next layer of what we're navigating, because my strong preference is confidence, and then it gets reassigned to arrogant. One of my biggest fears in showing up as humble is that I'd be a wishy-washy doormat, because either way it gets reassigned. And so
I can speak. Oh, I'm sorry.
Oh yeah.
I was going to say, I can speak for humility because that's my strong preference. And because I come in with that, I'm invisible very often.
Yeah.
So I have to make a point of asserting if I don't want to remain invisible in the room. So.
Especially as we get older, right?
Yes, especially as we get older. Yeah.
Age is yes, absolutely.
Yeah.
So now we have a video that kind of summarizes all of this. It was actually a Pantene commercial from a few years ago. Beth or Wing Faith will be sharing it. And here we go. Oh, is there volume?
Is the volume not coming through?
No.
Do you have to go back out and then come back in and click share audio?
I
I just recently had that situation in a presentation.
I did. It's
Hmm.
clicked.
All right, were you muted?
That might have been it. Let's try this again.
All right, that back.
Better?
There you go.
Around me
Video,
are
though.
familiar
The video.
faces.
Is it working?
I see
Yep.
your desktop.
Oh.
We heard. We can't see.
One more time.
Woo! I realized I could have just sung the song. Here we go. Now it's happening.
Now we're
She said
good.
that with confidence.
Yes. Thank you, Beth.
All around me are familiar faces, worn out places, worn out faces, bright and early for their daily races, going nowhere, and their tears are filling up their glasses, no expression, no expression. Mad world, mad world.
Thank you, Beth. So the reason, again, to tie these pieces together, it's that so we don't feel crazy when we're navigating this dynamic and don't know where the mixed messages are coming from.
Mhm.
And so that sets us up to now go look at our polarity. I'm going to talk about systemic nudges that we can do and kind of how this gets, what we do about it. So we're not just left to be sad about it. So one is systemic nudges, how we set up our systems. One, like the screen with the auditions, some it's removing names from resumes. So how do we set up our systems to diminish the layers of unconscious bias and nudge ourselves toward equity is one piece. But turning it back personally, it's like, how do we set up our personal nudges, which we're going to talk about with our personal action steps and early warnings. Sorry, I keep switching back and forth between showing that and not. So like for myself, when I was wrestling with confidence and humility, like part of my humility development was how do I make space for different learning styles? Like how do I make space for introversion learning styles, or kind of slowing myself down to ask people, how else might I do this, so that I can reinforce from my perspective, reinforcing my confidence and my ability to facilitate by knowing that I'm humble enough to ask for and integrate feedback. So that was kind of the way I could nudge myself. I don't have to go for embodying humility the same way Liz does, because that wouldn't be authentic, right? It's like, how do I learn from and grow? And that's the question of the nudges.
Mhm.
The other one is being grounded in our leadership so we can clarify intent. When women get feedback to be more confident, one of the things that tends to happen is they're told be more confident, and then in the very next review cycle, they're told, oh, you've really overdone it. We want you to be more collaborative. And so one of the things that you can do is reframing publicly. When someone says, wow, you're sure pushy, you say, wow, I'm glad you're noticing I'm really passionate about this. Let me know what I could also do to include other people's opinions. Or when people say, wow, you're really being a pushover on this one, you say, I'm so glad you're noticing that I'm waiting for everyone to respond, because it does really matter to me that I hear everyone's responses. I'm also, if what you're saying, if you're saying it's taking too long, I'd love to hear that feedback more concretely. So it's like, how do we take it when we're being reframed as the downside? When you know what you're going for in the upside, you can reflect that back to the person who's kind of name calling in a way. Also, when you get feedback privately, someone says, I want you to be more humble. You say, you can say, great, like I appreciate that feedback. I'm going to go for these qualities of humility. So can you let me notice when you see me doing those? And you hear how that language interrupts the unconscious bias. And then same, and I'm also going to be confident. And here's the ways I'm going to show up still as confidently because I value that. So I want you to notice when I'm doing that well also. Because it makes the upsides of both more concrete in the feedback giver's mind. And that can be a way to actually get somewhere instead of just getting the opposite feedback every 6 months. So that's kind of those pieces. We kind of wanted to check in with you guys. What's hitting home for you, to add that into the chat? Oh, that's funny. Yardena.
Yeah, Yardena. Yeah.
The artist Felice House reimagined Western movie heroes as women. The toughest part, she said, was getting the facial expressions right. Women are taught to smile and be coy and sexy. So this is what my article's about. my chapter is about. It's all about how women are socialized and the dynamic. Act your shoe size, not your age.
Positive on the reframing then.
The reframe. And it does take a lot of practice. It's also exhausting, and we're in it anyway, so we can always try something different. We can always, we have to, it is exhausting. And that the word cloud can help you know the language for reframing too.
Right.
That's why we'll share that.
Right.
Okay. So Liz, do you want to set them up for the now?
Yep. So what we would like to do with the remaining time is have you put these things together. And we're going to redisplay the word cloud map for you. And we're going to encourage you to do a personal map for yourself. And Lindsay, you've got that ready to upload for people. So when you look at all of the quadrants again, we'd like you to select a few items in each quadrant. Going back to the, developing a plan. Each quadrant that speak to you best as a creativity practitioner for yourself, facilitating, coaching, and we'd like you to start filling out your own map and using keywords in each of the quadrants so that you have a map that fits your description of yourself. Okay. And as we draw this to a close, I want to point out that Barry sometimes talks about upsides as what we value and downsides as what we fear. Upsides are what we value, downsides are what we fear. So maybe as you come to a close, you could think about putting one thing that's either marking or adding something that's especially important to you as a value and a fear in each of the quadrants. Okay, how are we doing on time, Lindsay?
We're good. That's
okay. All right. So now going back to the slides.
Yes, I had to skip ahead, so now thanks everybody.
Yeah. So you've seen this, and now you've seen the infinity loop, and the way the shape of the infinity loop is because we're trying to maximize the amount of time we spend in the positives and minimize the amount of time that we spend in the negatives, right? So that's why it's a little misshapen as far as an infinity loop. Sometimes we call it the butterfly. And they're on a regular polarity map. You have these inner quadrants, and then there are outer quadrants, and we're going to show that to you right now. Next slide. And the outer quadrants have to do with what are the action steps. That's what's in the upside quadrant, the action steps and the early warnings. So now that you have sort of started filling out your map, I'd like you to go first to the pole. Like I would start with the upside of humility because that's the one that I felt most drawn to. So what I would answer then is the question, what's one thing I can do to gain or sustain the upside of humility? And then I might go to the other side. What's one thing I can do to gain or sustain the upside of confidence? You're looking for specific behavioral actions to take, things that you could actually describe in action terms. One thing you can do to gain or sustain the upside of this poll. We're asking you for reasons of time to just focus on one thing right now. In reality, as you would expand this map, you would put several things there that would allow you to gain or maintain upsides of humility, upsides of confidence. But now here's what we do about the negatives. Do I have to go all the way to being a pushover before I do something corrective? Well, maybe not. So the reason that we call them early warnings is they're early. I would like to know that I could do something about it before I have been banned from the team because I'm such a pushover, or going home depressed after a meeting because I have been oppressing myself the whole time. So what is an early thing that I could notice happening? And I love that Beth Slazak and Missy Carvin have a word for this, a metaphor for this. They call these the rumble strips. So think of yourself driving down the road. This is a rumble strip that you're leaving the lane of humility or leaving the lane of confidence rather than a full-on crash into a wall, okay? So one early cue that you're overdoing humility and ignoring confidence, and then to the other side, one early cue that you're overdoing confidence and ignoring humility. And again, it's preferable if this could be something you could count or note very specifically as happening. Is it, for me, for example, I know I'm overdoing it when I find myself apologizing several times in a meeting. Lindsay, do you have one, an early cue for you that you might be overdoing confidence?
Nope. No, just kidding.
Well, that would be it. When Lindsay answers the question that way.
Yeah, actually, it's when I realize that I'm arguing, when I use my worst combination of words that I hate when other people use, which is yes, but. If I even think yes, but, that it means I'm not hearing what other people are saying anymore. Because
So
I'm not
even,
examples. Yeah, I'm not even stopping myself enough to say no, I disagree. Like, and here's why.
Right.
That's one of my flags.
Okay, that's great. All right. Next slide. So now what we'd like you to do is to reflect on what's the next right thing for you to do. And here's the guidance I would offer on that. Generally, the next right thing for me has to do with how do I supplement something in my behavior because I've become aware of a polarity. So what is it that I'm either overdoing or underdoing, if you will? And that for me has power of next right thing to do. So either I'm looking to counteract a downside that I'm experiencing or go after an upside that I haven't been going after very much.
And then with the next bullet, how might your plan be perceived? This is when we add back in the unconscious bias piece. Knowing that I will be navigating this unconscious bias piece, I know the next right thing for me, and I'm going to have to add in telling someone this is what I'm going for. Right? So to that's what that question is about. So this is to look back at your actions and early warnings and make a little bit of a plan for how you're going to do that.
And now I'm thinking that, Lindsay, people could go back in for a 5-minute share in the breakout groups.
Yeah. And
based on what this was all about. Okay. So this is a way of making a public commitment or just reacting to how this has gone for you to do this mapping.
Yeah. And before you get into too much of a conversation in there, we do want you to say one of the things you're declaring to go for. This may be the nudge you've set up on your non-preferred poll, or it may be how you're gonna one of your rumble strips is. So just share something declarative about how you want to show up based on what you've learned today.
Yeah, that's great. That's great. So can we send them back, Beth, to 5 minutes of share time? All right.
All right. Bye, y'all.
Bye.
Okay. Welcome back, everybody. We wanted to share this map with you, that Lindsay has put into the chat. We wanted to show you what a full map is like with the actual questions that you would be answering for the quadrants with the infinity loops in the butterfly shape. And we want to point out a couple of features that we didn't have time to go into today. At the top of the quadrants, you'll see this thing that is called the greater purpose statement. And this is really where you identify this thing that will keep everybody in the room or keep you focused on what's the higher reason that you're putting these two things together. What is it that's driving you to leverage both of these poles? So we were trying to put it in the context of being our best selves creatively, and maybe being our worst selves creatively would be the down, the deeper fear at the bottom of the map. And when you're filling out this part of the map, it should really be something big and grandiose, not, small. And it shouldn't just be something about one of the poles. To be my most confident self, no, that's about confidence pole. To be, my full self or fully creative, that would be a way you would fill that out. And the deeper feeler should really be the opposite of that. So that map is available to you as a PDF, and on the back, Lindsay has done a great job of giving you information about how to leverage polarities and how to use the map. So please make use of this. It's something that the Polarity Partnerships makes available, and we want you to have it as your key tool from today too. All right, Lindsay, off to you.
All right, and the way we're going to close it out as a high leverage action step is that we'd like you to write one note of appreciation to someone, at least one person who's here, using the private chat message function, where you can pull down the little bar and see all the people's names and chat to someone a thank you. Thank you for this concrete thing. And then if you get a thank you, to respond with "you're welcome." So please take a moment to do that. And we so enjoy this and are so tickled to have been here with you guys today. I even did it wrong where I wrote back, "thank you."
Me too.
So, sorry. So it can be so hard. So on that note, thank you so much. It has been our honor and pleasure to share confidence and humility with you, our polarities, which we love, and supporting the creativity community, which we could not love more. So thank you guys.
Yeah. And a reminder, save your chat. The little 3 dots next to file will allow you to save chat, because there's some wonderful comments and references in there as well. Thank you. Ciao.
Thanks, everybody. It was a wonderful experience. Thank you, Lindsay. I'm glad that you didn't give birth yet. And Liz, it is so wonderful to be a part of one of your sessions again.
Thank you, Mary Ellen.
Real treat.
You're welcome. You're welcome.
Bravo, bravo. Real treat.
As always, and unsurprising, amazing. Thank you. Thank you both so much. And thank you for I love that closing activity. That was so much fun to do. I got 3 thank you notes written to people, and then I ran out of, and I'm certain the typing was fantastic.
Oh, always. Yeah, right. For me too.
Yeah. We're not done yet, though. We still have at 7 p.m. social event where they're prototyping with Allison James from Invention Convention. She is a delight. And then tomorrow we've got 2 replays. Tim Bassiter And then later on the afternoon, we have dung beetles, something in deserts. It's there. We'll have it. And in between, we'll have engaging virtual brainstorming activities and the part 2 from Mary Ellen and Cheryl. Poetry and photography. We're calling it photography. So there's still a day and a half to go.